Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler goes down June 29th at UFC 303. There's been some matchups already announced on the card, but it's time for me to tighten this matchmaker hat a bit and build the perfectly stacked UFC 303 fight card. We'll quickly look at what's been announced. Obviously, McGregor Chandler at the top. Cub Swanson and Andre Fili is a good fight for sure, but I'm pushing that down to the prelims. That won't remain on the main card. Jamal Hill Roundtree, it's going to be our main card featured bout. As far as some of these other matchups, decent names like Karate Hottie, Joe Pyfer, Bueno Silva Chiasson, but not enough heat on the prelims. So I'm going to stack the prelims a little bit more and create some magic for the pay-per-view and make a card that's worth watching in-depthly, and we're going to have our eyes glued to the screens. Maybe it won't be as stacked as 300, but it's going to be pretty damn solid. So let's first start it off with a prelim fight that I think would be magical for UFC 303. Nate the Train Landwehr versus Kyle Nelson. How do we not book this fight? Nate the Train had an epic performance against Jamal Emmers, knocked him out in the first round, absorbed some damage. Kyle Nelson fought on the same night as him and put on a bit of a showcase against Bill Algeo in a fight where he was a big underdog. Nelson called for the fight against Nate the Train. I think it makes perfect sense. Nate the Train's already had a chance to fight a ranked opposition, a Dan Ige. He lost on that test. Kyle Nelson is teetering towards the top 15. I would say the winner of Nate Landwehr and Kyle Nelson would get that top 15 shot next. But forget about what's going on afterwards. I expect this to be a striking war, and I think it would be a magical addition to UFC 303, which is going to be heat for the prelims. And I'm telling you right now, 303 needs better prelims. So I'm rooting hard that the UFC ends up watching this. I don't know. I might be on Dana's bad side after the 300 montage that he dropped me. But I think Kyle Nelson versus Nate the Train Landwehr is a potential fight of the night, and it's a banger for the prelims. That's a must add. So this one right here will be the first one we're going to put on the card to really spice the prelims up. But we're not done spicing up the prelims. There's more that I want for these prelims. I think we bring Dominic Cruz back. Yes, I'm putting him on the prelims, but it's a McGregor card versus Kyler Phillips. Listen, Dom Cruz, he's been out a little while. We haven't seen him since 2022. It was the Marlon Chito Vera fight where he ended up getting knocked out. Either he fights this summer or we're going to boot him from the rankings due to inactivity. And what better matchup than Kyler Phillips, who's coming off of a Pedro Munoz win, beat Barcelos before that. He's on a 3-fight winning streak and seems to be finding his foot in the UFC. Has slick striking. I think it's an interesting stylistic matchup. A fight that Dominic Cruz could definitely get laid out in without a doubt. But let's put it together. Why not? Maybe the UFC is trying to create a Dominic Cruz fight night co-main event with Cody Garbrandt, and we'll run that one back. Maybe that's what they'll do. But for me, I would rather see Dominic Cruz have to hold his spot against the next generation instead of just keeping this ranking position but not fighting somebody who's on the rise right now. Kyler Phillips and Dominic Cruz on the prelims of this card is going to be a sick fight, and I think Kyler Phillips is probably going to dust the older Dominic Cruz. Sorry to Dom Cruz. Unfortunately, I think he's getting sacrificed for a real good prospect. Next fight on these prelims, it's getting better, honestly. These prelims are going to be heat. These prelims are competing with 300, at least the prelims I'm dropping. Maybe not the ones the UFC's dropped already, but the ones I'm dropping. We got to put Michael Morales and Neil Magny together. Morales beat Jake Matthews. He beat Max Griffin. He beat Adam Fugit. He beat Trevin Giles. 4 okay names. Specifically, a good one is that Max Griffin win and the Jake Matthews win. But 4 names, right? Good little UFC run as a Contender Series winner. I think it's time to throw him to the Neil Magny test. Magny is the upper echelon of gatekeepers. He just beat Mike Malott in a fight that he was losing, but had a great comeback win. How do we not give Neil Magny another difficult fight? This is how it goes. Neil Magny, unfortunately, defends the guard of that top 15. Michael Morales is trying to break into that top 10 and actually start getting the rub as far as maybe becoming a contender in the next 2 years. I know he's only 24 years of age, but 4-0 in the UFC, And I'll tell you a stylistic matchup that I think is favorable. I believe now is the time to book this Neil Magny fight. And at UFC 303, it's going to give a lot of attention on Michael Morales. He's going to be seen for a lot of newer fans that maybe only are casuals checking out Conor McGregor. And let's say he goes out and he knocks Neil Magny out, an extremely tough task that's huge for his career. Now, if he gets pushed and tested and maybe we dwindle the hype a little bit and we hold him back, but he still beats Neil Magny, I think that's good for him. It's very unlikely that Michael Morales retires undefeated in MMA. I know he's 24, but it's time for a legitimate test. And Neil Magny, the king of all gatekeepers, is going to be that legit test. And we're doing it at UFC 303. I think the OG Magny deserves a big spot, which would be a 303 fight. And I think Michael Morales deserves the chance to break into the rankings, to break into the upper echelon, and fight on the Conor McGregor's card, which is views, numbers, big money opportunities later on. So I'm going Michael Morales versus Neil Magny at 303. I think that's a pretty sweet matchup for these prelims. Now, I'm going to bring a money featured prelim. It's going to be Dan Ige versus Diego Lopez. Give me that fight. I think they're like 13 and 14th ranked in the UFC featherweight division. Ige's 13, Lopez at 14. I know it's not a huge jump up in the rankings for Diego Lopez, but it's a really cool fight. Dan Ige is no slouch. He's coming off an impressive knockout against Andre Fili. And Andre Fili's fight was initially supposed to be on the main card at 303. No, I'm pushing it back on the prelims. It's going to be before this one. He's coming off of a big W, though. I mean, he lost to Bryce Mitchell, but he did a lot of damage in that fight. Diego Lopez coming off the big UFC 300 win against Sadiq Youssef. I think it's smart to put Diego Lopez on that UFC 303 fight card. Give him somebody ahead of him in the rankings, but don't rush him up too quick. Don't give him a Movsar Evloev rematch. Don't throw him Arnold Allen. Instead, give him a really difficult gatekeeper in Dan Ige. That's the fight that I want. I want to see how this one will play out. Dan Ige's striking is dangerous, and he could give Diego Lopez a lot of trouble standing up. Lopez may have to look to get this fight to the ground, and we need to see how Lopez is going to deal with a good boxing skill like Ige, very quick hands. And honestly, I just like the stylistic matchup. I think Diego Lopez wins. Can you imagine he finishes Dan Ige? How big would that be for his career? Dan Ige is not a guy that gets finished. Inside of the UFC, he has never been finished. But can you imagine Diego Lopez does it on UFC 303? This would be incredible. I think this is a must. I want to see this fight a ton. I think it makes a lot of sense. I don't need to rush Diego Lopez to the elite of the elite just yet. Availability-wise, I think Lopez is good to go by 303, as will Dan Ige, because he hasn't fought since February. And at 303, you need to put Diego Lopez, who's somebody that's being built as a star on the come-up, on the card. And I think a featured prelim spot for him, genius. Needs to happen. It's the fight to make. Has to be. And I'm putting Diego Lopez versus Dan Ige as our featured bout for UFC 303. Now, when we jump over to the main card, I think that there may be some frustration and naysayers in the comments, but we're opening the card up with Bo Nickal versus Gerald Meerschaert. Sorry, guys. Bo Nickal was on the main card of 300, and he opened the card up, and that helped, develop his stock a bit more, but he got tested a little bit. Give him another test. Give him a slight step up in test. Gerald Meerschaert is very tricky with his jiu-jitsu, and he has capable striking. I don't think Bo Nickal should be fighting another trash can. I think he should be fighting somebody that has legit UFC wins and might be a difficult matchup for him, and I want to find out what happens next. Bo's undefeated 6-0. I think now's the time. Give him a little bit of a jump, and it's going to be a difficult jump because Meerschaert's awkward, and he's very tricky on the ground, but it's also a fight that Bo Nickal might be able to super impress, and he's not going to be in too much danger in the striking. Meerschaert's not known for a ton of power. Granted, he dropped Bruno Silva. I don't know how that happened. It's the game. He's got tricky jiu-jitsu, though, but Bo Nickal's a high-tier wrestler, a higher-tier wrestler for sure than Meerschaert. Higher-tier grappling potentially, too. And I think Bo is going to get the push from the UFC, so expect him on this 303 main card under Conor McGregor. Expect him in a big fight. And I think that Gerald Meerschaert is just enough of a step up in competition where this makes a lot of sense. Meerschaert is coming off of a win over Brian Barberena. They're both coming off W's, which is something I like in matchmaking. And I don't think the Jacob Malkoun fight, which I saw teased out through social media, is true. And I also think Malkoun might be a tad too much of a jump up. You say, oh, but Meerschaert's beaten better comp than Malkoun. Yeah, but Malkoun's still a young prospect who's got potential. I think we give him Gerald Meerschaert. And I think we open this main card off with the ginger savagery of Bo Nickel and a chance to continue to build his stock and eventually in 2025, I'll assume, break into the top 15 or at least take a fight inside of the top 15. So I think Meerschaert is the most sensible matchup. It's going to be on the main card. It's going to be the main card opener. They're not going to do it as a feature prelim. It's not going to be back starting the night off. It's going to be our main card opener. That's just how it goes. Now, another fight on the main card, which is going to be the next one. How do you not put Money Moicano on the main card? And I think we give him Beneil Dariush. Another thought that I had was Dan Hooker. So honestly, Dan Hooker or Beneil Dariush could end up being the matchups for Money Moicano, depending upon the availability of Dan Hooker. But I kind of feel like there's a chance he'll want to get on that Australia card. Money Moicano fighting under Mr. Money Mac himself, Conor McGregor, makes a lot of sense, especially after his performance at 300. And honestly, the post-fight interviews that he deliver bring massive numbers, and I think he deserves a shine moment here. And Dariush is a winnable fight. Dariush's grappling is very good, but this is a matchup for Moicano where he might have to strike a bit. Like, I'm curious to see how his grappling stacks up with Beneil Dariush. Now, I know Dariush is on a 2-fight losing streak, and I know Moicano is coming in with wins, but sometimes these crossover matchups just make sense with losses coming from the Dariush side and Moicano on the surge upward. I think this is the fight to make. I know Money Moicano is interested in Beneil Dariush. Dariush at one point was a top contender. His only losses are to the elite of the elite and Arman Sarukian and Charles Oliveira. And I think Moicano is actually in a winnable position here because he's not dealing with an extreme striking threat, and I don't think he gets dominated in the grappling. I'd say Dariush is the better wrestler, but Moicano's jiu-jitsu is really difficult to deal with, and he's got capable Muay Thai. I'm going to throw Money Moicano Dariush together. I don't think that it's necessarily the banger of bangers, but I think it's a sensible fight based upon the rankings and where both of them are at in their careers. So we're going Money Moicano, Beneil Dariush. Now, I needed to bring fire for the co-main event. We already have the main event, McGregor versus Chandler. We already have our featured bout, Roundtree versus Hill. The co-main event needs to feature an Irish savage on the come-up. It's going to be Ian Gary against Colby Covington. This is the fight to make. What are we doing not making this happen? I don't care about these stupid stipulations that Colby put online. UFC is the #1 boss. And I think that Colby Covington needs to take on Ian Gary, a battle of elite shit talk, a battle of a little bit of internet beef that we've dealt with between the two fighters, and a very interesting stylistic clash because we get to see Ian Gary tested against somebody with high-tier wrestling skills. Granted, it's an older and slower version of Colby Covington, but still a Colby Covington that held down Leon Edwards for some time in that fight. He didn't take a ton of damage against Leon. He looked like shit, for sure. Granted, he makes claims he was in the fight injured, yada dee, yada do. If Ian Gary can knock out Colby Covington, he has just guaranteed himself superstardom in the UFC, and it would be the biggest win of his career and the best decision he's ever made. Colby Covington is a tricky style for him, but I'm telling you, I think Ian Gary's takedown defense holds up really well in this matchup, and I think his striking from distance actually will be more effective than Leon's. I'm not going to go out on a whim and guarantee it. But if there is a guy that can knock Colby Covington out, it's Ian Gary. And let me make this known right now. We're doing 5 rounds. This is not a 3-round co-main event. I think 5-round co-main event for Ian Gary. This is a chance to become close to a #1 contender. The issue would be Shavkat Rakhmonov. But forget about contendership. Forget about world titles. It gives him a chance to take on a former interim champ, a 3-time title challenger, a big name in the space, and somebody that he's actually got some legitimate beef with, and they get to squash it. I don't think they'll squash it. I think maybe Ian Gary will squash Colby Covington and get some self-satisfaction. But I don't think Colby will shut up even if he ends up getting knocked out. But it's the fight to make. It's the fight to make for sure. Colby has to fight back a bit. I'm not doing Colby versus Usman 4. Colby versus Shavkat, he's not fighting Shavkat. Colby Jack Della, I don't think it happens. There's way too much hype already built around this Colby Covington versus Ian Gary fight to miss the opportunity as putting it under Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. It just makes it a bigger fight. And I think Colby's interested in the big business fight right here. and the shit talk that will go down on the UFC 303 press conference could be some of the best shit talk in the history of the UFC. So let's put together this masterpiece of a card. I'm telling you guys, I think I just made UFC 303, outside of UFC 300, the card of the year. A banger for a lifetime and something that we'll remember forever. And for Conor McGregor's comeback, I think it has to be stacked. It's International Fight Week. I don't want mid prelims. I want savage prelims. I want an animalistic main card. And I think what I just delivered for you guys is the perfect card for UFC 303. Hopefully the UFC follows suit. Hopefully they check out this video and realize I know what I'm talking about. And don't just judge me off that 300 montage old video from December. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you all smash the like button. Let me know in the comments what you thought of me stacking this UFC 303 fight card. And do you agree with the matchups? I'm curious if you guys are on the same page as me, or maybe some of you guys want to see something different. So let me know. I want to hear from you guys. W in the comments if you got nothing to say, but just enjoy the content. I appreciate each and every one of you for supporting, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.